Being a team player. One of my mentors told me that playing well with others was like one of the keys to success in special operations. And it was true there, and it's been true in business. You know, I've watched a lot of people strive to be successful, and they worked up the courage to go after their dream. They worked up the nerve. They dealt with the fear. They overcame all of that, but they never pushed their pride and ego aside to be able to play well with others, to be a team player. When I was in Regiment, I remember, I had a lot of guys that came through my platoon. I was a platoon leader most of my time while I was in Regiment. Did hardly any staff time. The staff time that I did do, I was a targeting officer, or assistant targeting officer, assistant operations officer for a targeting team, which is basically means that I helped facilitate the find, fix, finish process, basically dropping bombs on bad guys overseas. So before I had a Ranger platoon, I got to Regiment. It was my freaking dream job, man. I loved it. I deployed with them right away. And I got a 30,000 foot overview of how they ran operations in Afghanistan. And they put me on a team to help do the find, fix, and finish mission set. And then after that, I got pushed down to a Ranger platoon. Took over the Bad Mothers, 275. And I loved that name. I loved the Bad Mothers platoon, just the name of it was just dope. And those guys taught me everything about being a Ranger. I was just so honored to serve alongside of them. And when I got down there, if I'm being completely honest, I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome. I felt like these guys were way better than me. Frig, man, a lot of those guys came from more successful jobs than I had ever had. They had guys in that platoon that made more money than I had made before. They had guys in that platoon that had degrees. Going into the 75th into special operations was like, you're just around a bunch of killers, man, a bunch of people, a bunch of winners. And it was such a good feeling. But I got to observe kind of like who made it and who didn't, along the path, because I switched from enlisted soldier, I was an engineer. I came in the military as a private first class. And then I switched over, I became an infantry officer, got into the 75th. And that whole thing took me about 9 years, man. 9 years. Okay? And I saw a lot of people wash out. I saw a lot of people not make it to the 75th. I watched a lot of people not make it through the different military schools, the gates that you had to go through. I mean, shoot, I remember Ranger School. We had like 300 people that started. And by the end, I think our graduating class was right around 100 or less. And then in RASP 2, we had like 30-something or 40-something people that started. And by the time that finished, we had like 13 or less. And I mean, there was only a couple of officers that passed. I was fortunately one of them. And so I got to see a lot of like competitive people try to make it to the top. And if you look around in your life, maybe you see the same thing. A lot of people in your industry trying to make it to the top. But I'll tell you, one of the things that really separated the people that made it from the people that didn't was their ability to play well with others. Like when I got to Regiment, and I was the platoon leader of the Bad Mothers. Such an honor. I just love saying that, Bad Mothers platoon, And we were known for violence of action, professionalism, and grit. We were the platoon that you would call to basically just take it to the enemy, We were the guys you would call if you wanted to get shit done. That was the culture we set. Myself and the leaders. We were aggressive, but we also valued professionalism. We valued respect, discipline, doing the right thing. We didn't always do the right thing. Sometimes we did some shit stuff that was a little bit in the gray area. But if we pushed it too far, we learned from our mistakes and we adjusted and we kept going. But I watched a lot of different people come into the Ranger Regiment. So if you guys don't know, basically in the Ranger Regiment, if you are on the enlisted side, you have to go through RASP 1, and typically if you have a contract to get into the regiment, a Ranger contract, you're going to go through Ranger school, and then you're going to go to regiment. But sometimes you have guys that don't make it to Ranger school, or something happens and they go through RASP, and then they come to the regiment, and they have basically, I think it was an 18-month time period, if I remember correctly, where they got to go back to Ranger school and finish and get the Ranger tab, because it's the rules of the regiment, or at least it was at the time, that you had to be Ranger qualified, meaning you had to have a Ranger tab, not the scroll, but the tab. You had to have passed Ranger school to serve in the regiment. So 80, 90%, maybe 90, over 90%, maybe 95% of guys in my platoon all had a Ranger tab. They were Ranger qualified, and they had met the requirement. But you had guys that were still kind of coming through and working on getting their Ranger tab that were there as well. They were in that window. So I watched people come in. I watched new soldiers, new Rangers come in, and I watched several of them leave. I watched a lot of guys not make it in the Ranger Regiment because they got in trouble. They went out and got a DUI, or they got in an altercation, or they did drugs, or they did something that messed up. They self-sabotaged and destroyed their opportunity inside the regiment. I watched a negative mindset destroy some people's success in the regiment. I watched some guys come in, and they would get so mad that they didn't get picked for the deployment that they would just think that the whole organization was against them, and that they were being screwed over, and they would say, screw this, I'm getting out. And they would self-sabotage, and they would leave the service. They'd be like, screw this. And they would blame everybody. And then I watched other people come in, and I watched them look like they had confidence, and they had worked through the fear, the doubt, the insecurities, and they joined the regiment, and they got there. But they didn't have the ability to play well with others. They didn't have humility. They had too much ego. They weren't coachable. And when you show up to a Ranger platoon and you're not coachable, when you have too much ego and you can't play well with others, those guys eat you up, man. A players are dogs, bro. Winners are winners. They want to win, and they don't want any weak links around them. So an alpha is going to is going to call you up. An alpha is going to call you up. And when you have a team of alphas, the entire team is going to call you up. And when the alphas call you up, you have a choice. A lot of guys get defensive. Their ego and their pride gets hurt. And they start pushing back against the team, blinded by the fact that the team is actually trying to call them up, not call them out. I remember we had this one guy come in, and he was like in his 30s. He was like in his early 30s. And he was a nice guy. Seemed like he was going to do well. But the first 2 months in regiment were brutal for him. He left a very successful, I think it was multiple six-figure job, to come serve in the regiment. It was like a Pat Tillman story, you know? Pat Tillman gave up playing in the NFL to be in 275, and he was actually in the TAC company, the same company I was in. So was Matt Best of Black Rifle Coffee, same lineage. I never met either of them, though. But point being is that I watched this new Ranger come in, and he was smart. He was kind of, modest. He seemed like he was coachable, but he was older. And when the younger guys, the younger Rangers that were Ranger qualified, had been in regiment for a little while, a couple years, when they started calling him up, he got defensive. He shut down. He had problems with them. He got defensive, like I said. And what ended up happening is what the guys did, I watched them. They started like, they didn't physically surround him, but they started tightening up on him, kind of like a boa constrictor would. They started squeezing. They wanted him to rise up and become a team player and put his pride and ego aside and be more coachable and listen to them, because he wasn't listening. He was older, so he thought he didn't have to listen. And at that point, I'd seen the guys do this before. I watched people tap, man. I watched guys in come to regiment, and the pressure of the team was too much for them, and they tapped and they said, "This ain't for me," and they left. They couldn't play well with others. Okay? I also watched people go, when I went through the military, like through RASP, I watched guys that didn't make it. In Ranger School, I watched guys that didn't make it, and the common theme in both of those was that the guys, a lot of them, couldn't play well with others. They weren't a team player. So, guys, playing well with others and being a team player is part of success. In order to play well with others, in order to get along with others, you got to put your pride and ego aside. I had this other soldier, okay? He was an import. That's what they call somebody that comes from the conventional army into the Ranger Regiment on the enlisted side. He came from the 82nd Airborne. He had done, I think, 5 or 6 years over there, and he was coming in as a team leader, E5. And to be transparent, or to share with you guys, like, that's a very difficult thing for an NCO to do. An NCO that comes over into the 75th from the conventional army side, there's a lot of growth that he has to go through in order to succeed at the position that he's going to be given. Leading in the regiment is totally different than leading in the conventional army. It's very challenging. Imagine jumping from like flag football to the NFL. That's kind of what it was like. And so you get put into that position, and then you're going to be in charge of soldiers, and you have to also show that you're a team player. You have to keep your pride and ego aside, and you have to do a good fucking job. When I watched this import come over, he's actually one of my mentees now. Crazy. This was back in 2015, I think, is when he came over. So we served together, and then we both went our separate ways, and then actually he joined up in my mentorship and coaching program. And he's actually moving to Florida pretty soon. Pretty cool. So the whole thing came full circle. But my point is, with this guy, he went from conventional army to special operations ranger, and then he succeeded at a very high level in the Ranger Regiment. He was a top guy. He was a go-to guy in the regiment. Everybody he was reliable. And if we needed something done, he was a guy that we went to. And he ended up being a very, very successful import, which can be tough to do. And then afterwards, he went on to become a Green Beret. Moral of the story is that I watched a guy like that come in, and he had language barriers too. Didn't really speak English very well, so that you could understand that there was communication battles sometimes. And the point is that age was not the thing that limited this guy. He had already had some military experience. Same thing with the other ranger that I mentioned, the one that had a successful civilian career that was making multiple 6 figures. It wasn't age that slowed those guys down, and that was determining whether or not they were going to be successful. The thing that made them successful was that they got the job done. They overcame the fear, the doubt, the insecurities that you have to go through to get to the result, to get to the dream. But then the last thing that they did is they were team players. They put their pride and their ego aside eventually. And the team welcomed them. The alphas, they put pressure on both of these guys. And I watched the import come in. When they put pressure on him, he put his pride and ego aside, and he said roger that to everything that they told him. Everything that the Rangers told him to do, he did it. Hey, so-and-so, I need you to go do this for the range. And they might give him some bullshit detail that's way below his level, his duty and responsibilities, but he would just say yes. Like, imagine being a key leader and you're told, you show up to the regiment and they tell you to go mop the bathroom or something. And normally you have soldiers go do that. But you're like, roger that, I'll do it. And that was his mentality. He was there, and he showed himself that he was there to play well with others. Guys, as you continue on your path to higher levels of success, you got to be successful. You got to have the mindset. You got to have the winner's mindset. You got to overcome fear, doubt, insecurities, and all that shit. But you also got to be able to play well with others. That doesn't mean be anybody different than who you normally are when no one's around. You don't fake your personality. You don't fake it. You just be your authentic self, and you play well with others. Like, the goal is to walk into any room and be who you say you are. to not put on some mask, some fake personality. It's to be that person, but to play well with others and show that you're there to support the mission and the team, and you're not there for yourself and your own pride and ego. Pride and egos destroy people, man. They create wars, and they destroy people's success. So that's the message, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's little lesson, today's little story about the Ranger Regiment, being older, being a team player, and go out and just take this lesson and implement it into your life, guys. We need more people that are out there, more leaders that are out there winning and being team players. Conquer all.